Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Curator's Corner. I'm Thorin Tritter, Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. As many of you know, this is a weekly program that I started a few months ago when our building was closed because of the corona crisis, that looks in particular at individual objects or images in our collection to try and draw attention to them and to their significance at a time when the building's closed. As always, let me encourage you to pose any questions you have by typing them in the Q&A box that you can access by scrolling your mouse across the bottom or the top of the screen. I might not get a chance to respond while I'm presenting, but I'll certainly make time at the end of the program to answer any questions if I can. And one other comment before I start today, I'd like to re-emphasize an appeal that we are launching to try and raise $20,000 to support our virtual programs. And we're looking for 200 people to make $100 donations. I know $100 is a lot of money, but these are difficult times for nonprofits like the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, and I'm asking for your help to make a donation to help support our virtual programming in this fall, for this fall. So for the cost of maybe a month's worth of coffee at Starbucks or a nice dinner for two out at a restaurant, I hope you'll consider supporting the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Just go to our website and click on the Give Now button. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about a small white porcelain bell that stands in our collection. It's a replica of the official bell that was the symbol for the 1936 Olympic Games held in Berlin. This small replica was sold in Germany to visitors who attended the games and who wanted something to remind them of the event. Given that if our world had not been disrupted by the coronavirus, we would probably be gathering to watch the 2020 Olympic Games at this point. And so I thought it was an appropriate time to pull this item from our collection and talk about the 1936 Games. The item was given to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County by Helene Mayer, whose parents had attended the Berlin Games and purchased the bell in 1936 in Germany. I'm going to speak more in a minute about the significance of the 1936 Olympic Games, but the story of what happened to this memento is, I think, interesting in its own right. Martin Sommer was born in Germany in 1896, and after graduating from the Technical University in Munich, he went on to earn a doctorate at the University in Berlin, and then taught in the fields of metallurgy and mechanics for 4 years in Germany. By the 1920s, he had moved to America and helped to establish the Rustless Iron Corporation in Baltimore, Maryland, and here you see their logo that might be familiar to you. In 1928, Martin Sommer married Helen Benowitz, a German immigrant who had come to America 4 years earlier. Helen joined Martin in his work, establishing a new company together in Long Island City in 1933 called the Stainless Metal Company, which produced new and innovative products made out of stainless steel. 8 years after they were married, and with a successful company established in New York, they returned to Germany to watch the 1936 Olympic Games. They knew for sure of the controversies about the Games, but remember, this was before many of the things that we associate with the Hitler regime had taken place. It was before the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, or the annexation of the Sudetenland. It was also before the pogrom known as Kristallnacht, or the outbreak of the war, or the creation of any ghettos or concentration camps. Well, there was a concentration camp, but none of the killing centers. It's true that there were already voices in 1934 and 1935 about the mistreatment of Jews in Germany, but those voices largely faded out in 1936 in the lead up to the Olympics. So the couple went to Germany, presumably saw some of their family, watched some of the Olympics, and purchased this small bell. With the outbreak of war just 3 years later, however, Martin and Helen's appreciation for their homeland of Germany changed. No longer proud of their roots, the bell found its way into the bottom of some drawer. Their daughter Helene never remembered seeing it in their home when she was growing up. She only discovered it later, after her parents had passed away. Helene struggled with something that I hear about quite often. Mostly I hear it from people who come across Nazi paraphernalia that their parents or grandparents acquired while they were fighting during the war and serving in the US military. The children or grandchildren don't want to keep the items that may be emblazoned with the swastika, but they also don't feel comfortable selling the objects on the internet or throwing them away in the trash. They reach out to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center as a place that can use these kinds of objects of hate to educate people about the events of the 1930s and 40s, and hopefully to combat prejudice, racism, and intolerance today. Helene's situation was a bit different because her family didn't acquire the bell during the war, but as visitors to the Olympic Games. But her dilemma was much the same as what I've heard from others. The problem posed by the Olympic bell also reflects a larger challenge the German Americans faced in the years leading up to and after World War II. Really, it goes back even to before World War I. In the period before World War I, German Americans, like almost every other immigrant group in the United States, could show pride in their ethnic background and celebrate their roots. But with World War I, and even more so after Hitler's rise to power in the 1930s, German Americans were embarrassed by their nationality. They sat silently watching the St. Patrick's Day Parade or the Columbus Day Parade, later the Israel Day Parade or the Puerto Rican Day Parade, or the myriad of other smaller demonstrations of ethnic pride. And if they came across items connected to their ethnic heritage, instead of displaying them proudly, they often buried them in drawers. I'm not saying their response was inappropriate. The nationalism of Nazi Germany was a key rallying point for an ideology of hate. There was every reason to distance oneself from it. Indeed, the nationalism of Nazi Germany even affected the way Americans demonstrated our own national pride. I think most people are familiar with the Nazi stiff-arm salute, or the so-called Roman salute. This photograph shows the crowd at the Olympic Stadium in Berlin offering the Nazi salute at the opening of the Games on August 1st, 1936. What's less well known, however, is that the Americans also used that same salute before World War II when saying the Pledge of Allegiance. It's sometimes referred to in America as the Bellamy salute in honor of Francis Bellamy, who authored the original Pledge of Allegiance in 1892 and described this gesture, the stiff-arm salute, as the appropriate one to use when saying the pledge. This photograph looks like it could be on the streets of Berlin sometimes in the 1930s. But it is a picture of school children in Southington, Connecticut. In 1942. Here's another from a school in Hawaii in 1941, and a third from 1915. When America declared war on Nazi Germany, Congress acted to make clear the difference between America and its enemy, adopting the hand over the heart salute during the Pledge of Allegiance in December of 1942. To get back to our bell, very soon after the Olympic Games ended in 1936, the wool fell from the eyes of the Summer family, and they had no interest in displaying this item any further. Still, this little porcelain bell is a reminder of those Olympic Games when the Nazis masterfully used them to their own PR purposes. Many historians don't talk about the 1936 Games in Berlin, but instead simply refer to them as the Nazi Games, because they were almost singularly focused on projecting a positive image of Nazi Germany to the world. Let me look a little closer at the bell. I said it's a replica of a real bell that was cast for the Games. I'll get to what's written on it in a moment. The bell was also the official symbol for the Games, and while the symbol only showed one side of the official bell, the porcelain version that we have has both sides of the bell. On one side, you see the German imperial eagle clasping the Olympic rings. The eagle, of course, a symbol of Germany that harkens back to the Roman eagle, used on military standards by the Roman army, and to the eagle that Charlemagne used as the first Holy Roman Emperor as his symbol. And at the bottom is the motto from the 1936 Games, I call the youth of the world. On the other side is a rendition of the Brandenburg Gate, one of the iconic landmarks in Berlin that was built in the late 18th century. It was also a landmark that was famously used as a backdrop for the Torchlight parade held in 1933 to mark Hitler's appointment as chancellor. One second here. On the bottom side of this part of the bell, it says the word simply the 11th Olympic Games, Berlin. While I don't have time to talk in great detail about the Olympic Games, I do want to use this opportunity to touch on some of the significance of those games. First, almost as soon as Hitler was named chancellor, Americans started to question the morality of having Nazi Germany host the Olympic Games. They had won the games in 1931, so before Hitler had become the chancellor, before the Nazis' rise to power. But after 1933, the question arose about whether it was right to leave the games in the hands of the Nazis. A range of actions in Germany sparked the concerns. News of violent suppression of communists and Catholics who had been voices of opposition in the aftermath of the Reichstag fire on February 27, 1933, were one thing that sparked concern. There was also news of the opening of a special prison for political prisoners in Dachau that came out in March of 1933. Then came the firing of all Jewish civil servants in April and the banning of any other political party in July. One other particularly relevant issue arose in April of 1933 when news broke that German athletic organizations had imposed an Aryan-only policy that systematically excluded Jews and Roma from German sports facilities. Avery Bundage, who was the president of the American Olympic Committee, said, "The very foundation of the modern Olympic revival will be undermined if individual countries are allowed to restrict participation by reason of class, creed, or race." By the end of 1933 and the beginning of 1934, there was a lively discussion in America going on about whether the US should boycott the 1936 games. And here you see a poster announcing a public meeting to urge for that boycott that was held in New York in December of 1933. There's also this political cartoon that was published in a Philadelphia newspaper in 1935 that highlights the Nazi ideals of intolerance and discrimination compared to the Olympic ideals of sportsmanship and international goodwill. Bundage, although he had raised the initial concern, became a vocal opponent to the boycott movement, saying politics had no place in the sport and eventually claiming that there was a Jewish communist conspiracy to keep the United States from participating. When Nazi Germany pledged that it would abide by the Olympic Charter, which banned discrimination, and announced that the German team would include Helene Mayer, a Jewish fencer, Brundage convinced the American Olympic Committee to attend the games. As things turned out, Helene Mayer won the silver medal in fencing for the German team and even gave the Nazi salute on the medal stand, although the German press refused to cover her accomplishments and she was largely ostracized. A very sad part of the story. President Roosevelt, back in the United States, stayed out of the debate, but privately his ambassador to Germany, William Dodd, and the previous ambassador to Germany, William Messersmith, both deplored the American Olympic Committee's decision to attend the games. And with the American decision to attend, any additional boycott movements in other countries collapsed. Once the games started, they were a huge success for Nazi Germany. For the 2 weeks of the games, the Nazis camouflaged their racist and militaristic character, banning the strident anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer from the city while the games were taking place, removing anti-Semitic signage or posters, and ordering that foreign visitors should not be subject to German anti-homosexuality or anti-Semitic attacks. Instead, the city was cleaned and festooned with the new German flag. Here you see the crowds of visitors walking down one of the main boulevards of Berlin, Unter den Linden, with the Brandenburg Gate in the far distance. The Nazis also ratcheted up the pageantry of the games. One of their most successful efforts was the inauguration of a torch relay that has now become an iconic part of almost every Olympic game since. In 1936, for the first time, German torchbearers, more than 3,400 of them, carried the flame from the site of the ancient Olympics in Olympia, Greece, to Berlin. In hindsight, and really at the time too, this image is a shocking contradiction. The Nazi flags in the background representing an ideology of hate, white supremacy, and military aggression, while the Olympic torch is lit, representing peace, sportsmanship, and goodwill. At the time, the contradiction went largely unnoticed. Most world leaders, except perhaps Adolf Hitler, were eager to put World War I behind them and focus on maintaining peace in the future. German athletes went on to dominate in the games, winning almost a third of all the gold medals and a total of 89 medals overall. The United States, which had the second highest number of medals, earned 56, so well below the tally that the Germans managed. And yet, I think most Americans remember the 1936 games for the achievements of the American athlete Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals, a feat not matched by any other track and field athlete until Carl Lewis in the 1984 games. Here you see the iconic image of Owens competing in the long jump, which he won the gold medal in. Jesse Owens was one of 18 African Americans on the 359-member U.S. Olympic team in 1936. Including Owens, the African American team members won 14 medals. So although African Americans made up only 5% of the Olympic team, they won a fully 25% of the Olympic medals. In the lead up to the games, many African Americans questioned the movement to boycott the 1936 Olympics, pointing out that in much of America, except for in the North, Black athletes in both collegiate and professional sports did not have the same opportunity as white athletes. They saw hypocrisy in the American criticism of discrimination in Germany without any effort to address the discrimination that was taking place on American soil. The contradiction was visible in Germany too, where Jesse Owens and his African American teammates were allowed to travel with and stay in the same hotel as his white teammates at a time when African Americans in many parts of the United States had to stay in Black-only hotels. Owens' success at the games did cause Hitler some consternation, as he hoped that German athletes would dominate. And there was the supposed snub that Hitler gave Jesse Owens by leaving the stadium before shaking hands with the gold medal winner. However, Jesse Owens claimed that there was no snub, and that has proved correct over time. On August 1st, the opening day of the games, Hitler shook hands with every German gold medal winner. When the president of the International Olympic Committee insisted that Hitler greet every medalist or none, Hitler skipped all further medal presentations. On the second day of the games, the American high jump team swept all 3 medals, with Owens's African American teammate Cornelius Johnson winning the gold and setting a new world record. Hitler, following his new policy, did not congratulate them or any of the other winners that day, although several newspapers did claim that it was a personal snub directed against the African American athletes. When Jesse Owens won his medal in the long jump and was not greeted by Hitler, again, various American papers claimed that he had been snubbed. But Jesse Owens claimed differently. He said Hitler had a certain time to come to the stadium and a certain time to leave. It happened he had to leave before the victory ceremony after the 100 meters. But before he left, I was on my way to a broadcast and passed near his box. He waved at me and I waved back. I think, he said, it was bad taste to criticize the man of the hour, meaning Hitler. A few weeks later, after returning to the United States, Jesse Owens added a further comment that highlighted who he did feel snubbed him. When Jesse Owens returned to the United States, he was greeted in New York by Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia and a ticker tape parade down the Canyon of Heroes. After the parade, a reception was held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, but Owens was not allowed to enter through the main door for his own event. Instead, he was forced to enter through a side door and ride up to the ballroom in the freight elevator. And while Jesse was feted in New York, Roosevelt never called to congratulate him, nor did he receive any invitation to visit the White House or any presidential recognition. A lifelong Republican, and you will remember that the Republican Party was known as the Party of Lincoln, but as a lifelong Republican, Owens went on to campaign for Alf Landon, who ran against FDR in the 1936 presidential race. And it was at a Republican rally in Kansas City a few months later in October that Owens drew attention to this treatment. He said, "Hitler didn't snub me. It was our president who snubbed me. The president didn't even send me a telegram." Much later in 1971, he responded to an interviewer's questions about what he experienced, and he chose to highlight the hypocrisy of America. He said, "When I came back after all those stories about Hitler and his snub, I came back to my native country and I could not ride in the front of the bus. I had to go to the back door. I couldn't live where I wanted." And then he added, "I wasn't invited to shake hands with Hitler, but I wasn't invited to the White House to shake hands with the president either." Jesse Owens was, of course, correct. Even as Americans criticized the anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany, much of our own country continued to embrace a racist ideology that promoted segregationist policies. That's not to say that America was the same as Nazi Germany. The ghettos of Nazi-controlled Europe were completely different from what would become called ghettos in inner-city neighborhoods in America. And of course, there was never a state-sponsored plan to murder all the African Americans in our country. Indeed, in many ways, it was the experience of fighting against Nazi Germany that highlighted American racism and hypocrisy, and that spurred Harry Truman to desegregate the armed forces in 1948 and to launch the civil rights movement in a few years later in the 1950s. When we look back at our bell and the 1936 Olympic Games, we see the American hypocrisy, but we also see the world's naive desire to believe the mirage of tolerance created by Hitler for those 2 weeks was going to continue. Of course, it didn't. As post-game reports were filed, the persecution of Jews resumed. Less than 2 years later, Hitler would march into Austria, followed a few months after that by the pogrom known as Kristallnacht. And then in September of 1939, just 3 years after the Olympic Games, Germany invaded Poland and started World War II. There is one other point I wanted to make about the 1936 Games and the pause in anti-Semitic activity in Germany that came with them. The relative calm of 1936 followed a previous pattern that combined to give many Jews in Germany a false sense of optimism. After Hitler was named chancellor in 1933, in January of 1933, anti-Semitism burst into the open in Germany. As I mentioned before, there were the firing of the Jewish civil servants, there were random attacks on Jews on the streets of many cities, and in April 1st of 1933, there was a one-day boycott imposed on Jewish businesses throughout Germany. But in the following year, 1934, things seemed to calm down. Now we know it was largely because of internal division within the Nazi Party. The following year after that, in 1935, there was another burst of anti-Semitic laws, including the Nuremberg laws, that revoked Jewish citizenship in Germany, relegating Jews to be second-class citizens, and set a precedent for segregation of Jews in Germany like never before. But with the Olympics of 1936, there was another period of marked calm. Anti-Semitic signs were removed. Public spaces became open again. And it was this cycle of harsh action followed by quiet that enabled some German Jews to optimistically keep believing that the worst was over and that things would improve. This was the case in 1934 and again with the Olympics in 36. The blinders finally came off in 1938 with the so-called Kristallnacht pogrom, when it became clear to all the Jews in Germany and Austria that they could not expect to remain safely in their countries. But there is a sad irony that when the Olympics brought that period of calm to German Jews, the pause in anti-Semitism actually proved dangerous. It was just enough of a lull to give some Jews the boost of optimism they needed to decide not to leave Germany. In hindsight, perhaps if the games had not happened, and if the easing of anti-Semitic policies had not happened, more Jews would have gotten out before Kristallnacht, or before later deportations to killing centers in the East. That's, of course, conjecture. But I think it is one other element about the Olympic Games of 1936 to keep in mind. Okay, I will stop there. Thank you for watching. And of course, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box. I will try to answer them. Let me take a moment to mention a few other upcoming programs. Next Wednesday, I'll be back to talk about a photograph taken 3 years before the Olympic Games that captures the public humiliation that was heaped upon a Jewish man and his non-Jewish girlfriend. Next Thursday, August 6th at 11 o'clock, please join us for our virtual chair yoga, which is designed for people of every age and should be a lovely way to connect and get limber. And then on Tuesday, August 11th at 11 a.m., we'll be holding a post-screening discussion about the film The Starfish with the documentary filmmaker who made that film, Tyler Gilden, and a speaker from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Association. Just to be clear, we're not going to show the film. We're asking you to watch that film independently in advance of our program, but then join us online at 11 o'clock for our discussion. You can find, of course, a full list of our programs on our website under the Events tab. Okay, let me take a look at your questions. Somebody writes, my father and family were there and I never thought to ask about souvenirs. My aunt, however, took photos of both the stands with the salute as well as of Jesse Owens. I have her photo book. She was only 13 years old. Yeah, that's tremendous. Those, I'm sure, are great photos, and they highlight the tensions and the problems at those games just as much as our bell does. Somebody else mentioned The Boys in the Boat, a super book about the American rowing team at the 1936 games. I have read that book, and it is super. I highly support it. Really gives another view into those games. Great. What was the discussion like in the US among the African American community about whether or not to participate in the Olympic Games? Yeah, the African American community, particularly after the Nazis pledged to abide by the Olympic Charter, which prevented discrimination, once that had happened, the African American community largely said, don't boycott the games, we want to go. And they did it because, or they felt that because they saw it as an opportunity for African American athletes, particularly in Germany in the 1930s under Hitler, to demonstrate their prowess, their skills, and to highlight the fact that the supposed Aryan supremacy was a bunch of bunk. So African Americans across America largely avoided the boycott or opposed the boycott movement and wanted to use the Olympic Games to show the talents of African American athletes. Okay, thanks very much to all of you, and I wish you a pleasant day and look forward to seeing you at our other program soon. Take care. Bye-bye.